The first thing I noticed was that I could breathe. Not the way you breathe when you step outside on a spring morning and think, vaguely, that the air seems nice today. I mean, breathe the way you breathe after surfacing from deep water, that involuntary, full-body expansion, lungs filling to a capacity you had forgotten they possessed. Every cell in the chest cavity suddenly awake and registering something they had been quietly missing for years without ever articulating the absence. Clean air. Not filtered air. Not air scrubbed by a mask or a machine. Just air. Actual, unmodified, uncompromised air, tasting faintly of rain and green things and something floral I couldn't immediately identify. I had arrived on a wide, elevated walkway, 30 stories above street level, with my back against a railing and the city of what had once been called Singapore spread out in every direction around me in the early morning light. And I need to pause here because I need to explain something about what I was looking at, and I need to explain it carefully because the English language in its current form was not built to describe this. Let me try anyway. Imagine a skyscraper. The kind, you know, glass and steel and concrete, vertical and cold and reflective, bouncing sunlight off its surface in sharp geometric angles. Now cover it. Cover every surface, every floor plate, every balcony edge, every structural column visible from the outside, in living plant matter. Not decorative planting, not a few potted ferns on a terrace. I mean a dense, layered, three-dimensional ecosystem running the full height of a 70-story building. Ferns and flowering vines and fruit trees trained horizontally along the floor plates, bamboo in structural clusters, cascading curtains of a deep-leafed climbing plant I didn't recognize running from the 40th floor to the 20th in an unbroken green wall. Now take that one building and replicate it in every direction as far as you can see. Now understand that the buildings are not simply covered in plants. The buildings and the plants have become a single system, structurally and functionally inseparable, the architecture and the biology negotiating a relationship across decades until neither can exist without the other. That is what I was looking at. I turned around slowly on the walkway, trying to take in the full 360 degrees of it, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years of time travel. A specific quality of disorientation that comes not from danger or confusion but from beauty. From encountering something so far outside the parameters of your experience that your brain briefly loses its footing and has to rebuild its model of what the world is allowed to look like. Let me tell you how I arrived here. 3 days ago I was in the back of a taxi in what used to be called Jakarta, in 2024, still a city of 30 million people fighting an ongoing argument with sea level rise and air quality and the specific urban exhaustion of a megacity that has been asked to grow faster than infrastructure can follow. I had the window down despite the pollution index reading on my phone showing red. I was watching the construction cranes. There were, I counted, 11 of them visible from my seat, all active, all building upward, and I remember thinking that every one of those buildings would be glass and concrete and steel, sealed against the outside air, demanding enormous quantities of energy to keep their interiors habitable in a climate increasingly hostile to human comfort. And I thought about the projection I had read the week before, that by 2080, without significant intervention, wet bulb temperatures in equatorial Southeast Asia would regularly exceed the threshold at which the human body cannot cool itself, even in shade, even at rest. I looked down at my watch. It was already glowing. Not the warning red of an imminent departure, but a soft, steady gold I had learned to associate with something it wanted me to see. Not a danger, a destination. I pressed the crown without hesitation. The Jakarta traffic dissolved. The construction cranes dissolved. The red air quality reading dissolved. And I arrived breathing. I spent the first 20 minutes simply standing on that elevated walkway, watching the city come fully awake in the morning light. The sun was rising behind a cluster of towers to the east, and as it cleared the roofline I saw for the first time what the transparent solar panels actually looked like in direct sunlight, and it was not what I had expected. I had expected something industrial, something that announced its functionality, the way solar panels in my era always looked like pieces of technology bolted onto the surfaces of things that didn't originally want them there. What I saw instead was closer to stained glass. Each panel, and they covered every glazed surface of every building in my sightline, hundreds of thousands of square meters of them, had a faint iridescent quality in the direct light, shifting between a pale gold and a barely there blue-green depending on the angle, so that as the sun climbed and the light shifted, the entire skyline changed color simultaneously, breathing through the spectrum in slow waves. The buildings didn't look like power plants. They looked like the city was alive, like the city itself was photosynthesizing. I walked. The elevated walkway connected to a network of bridges and sky paths threading between the towers at multiple levels. I could see them above and below me, green corridors of moving people and small electric vehicles barely larger than bicycles. The whole elevated network canopied by living roofs that turned each pathway into a tunnel of filtered green light. Below, at street level, I could see water wide, slow-moving channels running between the building bases, reflecting the tower gardens above them. Not decorative water. Working water. The channels were clearly integrated into the city's drainage and cooling system, their surfaces broken at intervals by the spinning forms of small vertical axis wind turbines mounted on low posts, each one turning in the morning breeze with a near-silent efficiency that seemed almost organic, the way a seed pod spins when it falls. A woman passed me on the walkway. She was moving quickly, carrying a bag, dressed in clothes I couldn't easily date. Natural fibers, earthy tones, nothing that advertised a brand or a decade. She glanced at me with brief, neutral curiosity and kept walking. I noticed that almost everyone on the walkway was moving at the pace of people with somewhere to be, but without the specific compressed urgency I associated with cities in my era, that collective low-grade stress that urban crowds carry in their shoulders and their jaw muscles and the way they orient their bodies slightly forward, always slightly forward, as if leaning into a wind that never stops. These people were not leaning. They were just walking. I found a bench set into a wider section of the walkway, surrounded on three sides by a dense planting of what looked like a native fern species, and I sat down and tried to process what I was seeing at a larger scale. The city had not simply added greenery to its existing architecture. It had rebuilt its entire logic around a different relationship between human habitation and biological systems. The buildings weren't separate from nature. They were nodes in a continuous ecological network that treated the urban fabric as a habitat, not an imposition on one. The plants weren't decorating the buildings. They were working, filtering air, managing temperature, absorbing rainfall, producing food in the vertical farm sections I could identify by their more structured, tiered planting on the lower floors of several towers. The solar panels weren't additions to the glass. They were the glass. The wind turbines weren't planted on hilltops outside the city. They were woven into the city's own surfaces, harvesting the wind that moved between the towers as a matter of basic urban physics. The whole system breathed together. I sat there for a long time, watching a pair of birds I didn't recognize. Medium-sized, dark with iridescent wing patches, navigate between two towers with the casual confidence of animals that had no reason to consider humans a threat. I watched a group of children cross a bridge 2 levels below me, trailing a teacher, stopping to look at something in a planting bed on the bridge railing, an insect maybe, or a flower, or simply the specific quality of morning light coming through a leaf. I watched the solar panel facades shift color as a cloud moved across the sun and then moved away, the whole skyline dimming and brightening in a single slow pulse. I thought about the taxi in Jakarta, about the 11 construction cranes, about the wet bulb temperature projections, about the specific kind of collective decision that must have been made, not once, not by one government or one generation, but thousands of times by thousands of groups of people across decades to arrive at this. To choose, repeatedly and at significant cost and against significant resistance, a different way of building. A different relationship between the human project and the biological systems the human project depends on. It wasn't inevitable. Nothing about this was inevitable. That was the thing I needed to understand, standing here in this green and breathing city in the year 2100. This future had not simply happened. It had been chosen, argued for and fought for and funded and built and rebuilt, decision by decision and building by building, by people who would never live to see it finished. My watch buzzed. The gold glow at the edge of the face had shifted to amber. Time to go. I stood up from the bench. The ferns around it moved slightly in a breeze coming off the water channels below. I looked one last time at the skyline, the living towers, the transparent panels catching the climbing sun, the green corridors threading between the buildings like a circulatory system, carrying people and air and light through the body of a city that had finally learned to live inside its means. Then I pressed the crown. The green dissolved. The clean air dissolved. The light dissolved last, the way it always does, reluctantly, as if it knows it's the part you'll miss most. I was back in the Jakarta taxi, the window still down, the air quality index still red, the 11 cranes still turning against a hazy sky. The driver asked me something I didn't catch. I said I was fine. I looked down at my watch. The gold glow was gone, replaced by the ordinary dim face of a device at rest. I rolled the window up and started thinking about how you tell people that the future they're building right now is not the only one available to them.